Consultations acknowledges with respect and gratitude that we are living in and sustained by Lenapehoking, homeland of Lenape peoples. The first peoples who lived here were the Esopus and Menacing peoples of the Lenni Lenape nations. Wars and Indian removal policies forced most of the Lenape westward. Many of their descendants continue to live here. Others live throughout North America. We honor all Indigenous communities, past, present, and future, as we seek to create a safe space for all. Before I introduce myself, I'd like to thank our sponsor, M&T Bank, and my fellow committee members, Patty Madison, Carolee, and Katie Naplartowski. Stand up if you're here and be acknowledged. Without them, this wouldn't happen. I'm Louisa Finn. I'm a fourth-generation Smiley family member, and I'm the chair of Mohonk Consultations. My ancestors are watching me today. I have Albert Smiley there and Eliza on my left, and Daniel Smiley, my great-grandfather, and my great-grandmother Effie on the right. This room was built out of their beliefs, their Quaker beliefs in peace, equality, and community. This room was built to host conferences which seeked to better the world. So I'm very grateful to these ancestors. I follow in their footsteps, and Mohonk Consultations does. I know that we're all called here today for some reason or other. We all made it through the door here. I would like you to maybe consider for a moment who in your life set the stage for you being here today. Could be a relative, could be a teacher or a friend, maybe an ancestor. And in the Quaker tradition, we'll just take a very short moment of silence and you can quietly thank them for their influence in your life. Thank you. Mohonk Consultations was born in 1980, out of the history in this room, to invite people to come together and talk it over at Mohonk. We are a volunteer board of about 11 or 12 people. We're nonprofit, supported by the Mountain House, but separate from it. And we do 3 programs a year. One of them is a public forum, such as you are at today. One is a conference, and one is a Distinguished Achievement Award. Be on the lookout for our Distinguished Achievement Award being offered this year to Judith Enck in June 11th, I believe. She is our local regional queen of the Beyond Plastics movement. So we hope you'll join us for that. And stay tuned for our fall conference. Our founder, Keith Smiley, wanted to shed light on environmental and social issues of the time, with a focus on practical outcomes. Keith was also a practicing Quaker, and his vision was wide. He was very, very concerned about our human tendency to separate ourselves from planet Earth. In his writings of the purpose for establishing Mohonk Consultations, he wrote, "To emphasize the importance of developing an effective method of assisting people to comprehend and to feel that they are part of the total functioning of Earth's ecosystem. Our mission is to support the interrelationship of all life on Earth." So it's a pretty wide mission, and we do our best to uphold it. Two hopeful experiences for me inspired today's event. One was just about exactly a year ago, Mohonk Consultations was invited to witness a brainstorming conference taking place at Mohonk, organized by one of our speakers today, Nick Robinson, called Making Peace with Earth, or with Nature. Making Peace with Nature, I believe. And he convened 3 generations of environmental lawyers, religious scholars, and indigenous people from the Lenape Nation. Their purpose was to recreate environmental law curriculum 50 years after the birth of the environmental movement. And myself, and I will speak for, I think, other board members who were able to witness some of these proceedings, it was absolutely electric to see these minds and hearts coming from different angles, all working to come up with new ideas to sustain human life on this planet. Feeling the energy of those cross-disciplinary and cross-cultural wisdoms was really deeply inspiring for me. So I wanted to make sure I had Nick back, and if possible, to have somebody who could represent the indigenous wisdom. Another hopeful experience for me was reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. For those of you who have not read that, Robin is she's a biologist who teaches, I believe, out of Syracuse University, but she's also a member of the Potawatomi Nation, and she writes extremely effectively from both traditions about healing our relationship with Earth. And I just came away from that a convert. Yes, we need both, and we need to hear these voices very clearly. Thomas Berry, who was a priest, a religious historian, and a geologian, was known for articulating a universe story that explores the worldview-changing implications of contemporary science, called The Universe Story. And for those of you who don't know about Thomas Berry's work, you can find a film that's very available called The Journey of the Universe. It came out in 2011. It's a documentary. And you can learn more about his ideas in that documentary. He said, "What is needed is a new spiritual, even mystical, communion with Earth, a true aesthetic of Earth, sensitivity to Earth's needs, a valid economy of Earth. We need a way of designating the Earth-human world in its continuity and identity, rather than exclusively by its discontinuity and difference. We especially need to recognize the numinous qualities of Earth." So I'm very pleased today, on this day after Earth Day, to introduce you to our 2 speakers who may help us to do that, Nicholas Robinson and Tiokasin Ghosthorse. Please help me welcome them. I will also introduce Katie Naplartowski, who will be our moderator today.
Thank you, Louisa. And I want to say that was just beautiful music. So the first question that we have here, or prompt, is about the title of the forum. The title of this forum, it's a mouthful, but carefully chosen. Words Matter: Indigenous, Ecological, and Legal Pathways to Healing Earth. Perhaps, Tiokasin, we could start with you. Can you please share with us just some general thoughts or meanderings, reflections that you have on this title and topic? And then, Nick, if you chime in also. Thank you.
Well, thank you for asking me to come here. Thank you to the Lenape people who are present among us. You may not see them, but I see them. I just want to say a little bit about where I come from and to present that I came here with my ancestors because the ancestors are my future. They go out before. They went before I did. So I follow my ancestors. They are not behind me, they are in front of me. And so in that way, I need to introduce that way we use in Lakota is Tiokasin chatanzi wiki paha michaji oyate toka he wichake le onkipiki ohewashte tashunke wanaki wakanta ga namako o betu owazio plakinktelo ukuchi ala wa onta ya amavleza yo me wakapataha wa yan namashio wichayaka acheki onta ya o anamakote ye lemita kwe agapiki opta achingtelo achachaki tokata oina jiwa midako oyasi. I can't translate any of that, and it's the reason why is and Nick and I talked about this, and so does Louisa and some of the other friends here I know, is that most indigenous languages are verb-based in the sense that we have codified our language to speak this language to you, but it's practically impossible in a language that is noun-laden. And so speaking from a verb language to a noun language means I'd have to put a period behind every word because it's involving no concept, as we have no concept because we cannot codify our language to speak in English. This relationship is not a connection, it's a relationship with nature. So it does not leave nature out. In fact, we do not have a word for nature. If this is who you are, it's what we do. We are nature. And that sounds too easy, but it's more integrated than that. And the language as it is has no word or concept for domination. Because domination gets in the way of relationship, gets in the way, and we can talk about this later, gets in the way of climate change. Because out of domination comes property and ownership. And so when I say we have no word for domination, the language in relationship with all other living beings, and not just an anthropocentric view of humans. In fact, an uncle of mine would say we are the last species to come to this planet. And so therefore we must be the most ignorant and not the most intelligent, because you see what we're doing to the planet. I find it to be true what he said. And so this language, as I know from the history keepers that I come from, about 200,000 years old. And you can take the Western world and their modern day science 5,000 years ago, but my reference point is 200,000 years of song, living with Earth and not domination on Earth. So the language, it has to be very spatial, multi-dimensional in recognizing it all. And so when you have a language that includes, you really think deeper about it, there is no word for exclusion. Now we need to step out of this box, and I'll probably describe that later, but that's just to get you going a little bit here. So I'll say it that way, and I don't want to thank Nick for being with me and knowledgeable and his experience, and a man to listen to, because he can, I don't want to say break down, because that's just scientific reductionism. He can recognize and acknowledge a lot of things that I was saying and put it in words that maybe you didn't understand how I presented it to you.
Well, it's a pleasure and an honor to be with you all today. I too want to thank those who cared for Lenapehoking for centuries before somebody else sailed up the Hudson River, as it's called. I also want to acknowledge my elder brother, because his words were what opened our gathering. Music are words. They're a different kind of word, but they are as much a word as what we're now using to convey. And I was happy to provide a little understory for that forest that he painted for us with his words. And remember when John Burroughs was teaching us all about the birds of the Hudson. It's the birds who speak with words too. And we all know the birds are speaking words. And we've forgotten to listen to the birds. The birds are becoming more extinct. The migrations are thinner. The ability of our habitat to sustain those migrations is disappearing as we sit here. And it's incumbent upon us to not just mourn that, but to do something about it, to behave in a way that heals and uses the words that can heal and restore the natural systems which the birds, our relatives, and us all depend upon and are part of. So I think about the evergreens that you're all looking at behind us. We wish we were facing the evergreens too, but we're having to look out the other window. And that is really not just a backdrop for our discussion today. These too are words. When you have a landscape, the landscape is speaking to us as a place, as a countryside of which we are a part. And we're not apart from the landscape, we're in the landscape. So I think it's quite nice that we have these trees for you to reflect upon as we gather here. Now, words, unfortunately, can be used in a positive, reaffirming way, or in a way that has destructive consequences. The words that make dominion happen, for instance, caused and legitimized the colonialism that brought people from Europe to come to colonize what we now call North and South and Meso or Central America. And they did that through words, papal bulls that were issued by the Vatican to justify the conquest and the seizing of indigenous peoples and their lands on the theory that no one else was there, meaning no European had discovered them yet. And so they promulgated the doctrine of discovery, which was a set of words in several papal bulls. And then because King Henry had decided he didn't want the Pope and became the head of the Church of England, the Church of England issued similar edicts saying that our sailors, our armies have the right to come and seize whatever they find in the New World. And that began a period of great disillusion. If you go back before that happened, words existed also. Gaudiamus igitur, Juvenus dum sumus, multus gratias tibiago. These are the words of ancient Rome that continued into Europe and gave us the Romance languages, parts of which are in English. If we go back to concepts before colonialism, we may find new ways of looking at how to get ourselves out of the problems that colonialism has left with us. So that's an appetizer for why words matter.
Thank you. Could you please describe the recent legal victories in New York State and at the UN protecting the human right to a healthful environment? And if we could start with you, Nick, that would be wonderful. And I'm just going to tag on another question here. Many folks here might not be aware of the Rights of Nature movement. Could you describe that as well? So the recently legal victories in New York State, the UN, and Rights of Nature, and then Tiokasin, we'd love to hear from you, of course, too. Thank you.
Well, this year has been an extraordinary year for awakening people. The United Nations in July of 2020 recognized that all people have the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. That was their words. 9 months before that, the people of the state of New York, and I hope each of you who voted in the right way, the people of the state of New York amended the Bill of Rights of the state of New York to adopt Section 19, which says each person has the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. So we've just taken this concept of having a relationship with the water of the planet, which we all experienced in the last 24 hours in an intimate way. The water of the planet, the air of the planet, which sustains all of our lives and the lives of plants and other species. All of this is now a guaranteed right in our Constitution and a human right across the world. And what does that mean? It means governments cannot take that right away from you. Now, if you reflect on that, we're seeing it being taken away from us, of course, for some time. But now people have shifted the entire set of assumptions. Instead of saying it's okay to do that, it's just part of development, part of life. Now, it's not okay to do it because it denies you a birthright. You were born being able to breathe. You weren't being born having to breathe dirty air. You were born needing to breathe. We're all mostly part of water. I mean, water makes up our bodies. We need water, but we need clean water. We need healthy water, and we need to live in health. And health is not human health alone. What is read into the healthiness is the ambient environment, including nature. Now, if these rights will be used by citizens to say to their governments, you really can't do this anymore. You've got to stop your predatory behavior toward nature. Give us back our health. Clean our water and get on with it. That becomes a powerful message that can be put forward on behalf of each person. You have to do it yourself, and with all of the authorities of government that are not letting you have that right. And that's now a universal right around the world. But it's still anthropocentric, isn't it? So the rights of nature are an interesting further movement. They exist in the constitutions of Bolivia and Ecuador, and they're now being put into legislation in other constitutions. But if you recognize that nature is autonomous and independent of humans, we didn't create nature. Therefore, we should respect nature and let it be healthy. But we have a problem with words because we don't discipline ourselves. We don't say to ourselves, stop eating too much. We don't say to ourselves, stop consuming. We just let the economics of consumption proceed. So by having the rights of nature, we're giving agency and autonomy to natural systems. We're saying to elements of ecology, you exist, and our governments, and by the way, us humans, have no right to deprive you of your existence. So just as the Bill of Rights said years ago, government cannot lock you up and throw away the key without due process of law, now we're saying the right to the environment is proclaimed by the United Nations, and human rights rhetoric, all human rights commissions, all councils of human rights have to begin articulating your right to the environment, not just your right to housing or something else. And now we're going to that next step in trying to pick a concept that will constrain our destructive tendencies by giving nature its independence. Now, nature's already independence. What we're doing is we're telling our governments that you can't ignore that anymore.
I think part of that, what Nick was also alluding to, which I will complete here, is that it's impossible in the way of at least a lot of indigenous peoples who aren't that colonized, is to know that there's no such thing as a right to anything. Only responsibility. Only responsibility. Animals, we don't have a right to them. We don't have a right to land where the animals live. We don't have a right to water. We have responsibility for all of that. So I think the fine line in this wordplay is to really start looking at the etymology of your language and maybe go back beyond Latin if that's possible. But you're in a land where we as indigenous peoples, the Lenape people, all the Lakota, all the indigenous peoples in the Western Hemisphere, we were on the shore. We had the view from the shore. And the ships came. Everybody came on ships. And in that view, the ships are still coming with these new ideas, these new worlds, these new narratives, these new, everything new, without recognizing what works here. And for thousands, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of years, these languages worked with the land. They belonged, the languages belonged to the land. I use example that I cannot apply Lakota to the Lenape land. There's no way I can do that. The sky is different, the stars are different, the sun is different, the animals are different, the water is different, the flow is different, the wind, the energy, very different. So when I came here, there's words that I can't come up with. I can in English, but they all have to be nouns, as if I need to entitle myself to title them or name them. But it loses meaning. And I'll say this before I go on. My 89-year-old mother told me, I just realized this a couple years ago, and we were talking in Lakota, and she said, son, realize that you cannot speak Lakota without intuition. And when I speak English, it's very different. And many other Native peoples who are losing their languages really aren't losing them, they're just out of touch, contact, context with intuition, because it's been redefined by this language I'm speaking to you now. And so these relationships that we have, all of us really, with nature, with land, with trees, and all the living beings out there, including the rocks and other forms of living, is that they have consciousness. Because earth, wind, fire, and water made us. And they live within us. But it's impossible for us to live in each of those elements. And we disrespect it by not understanding that they too have consciousness. They have a responsibility to us. But it's the mindset of domination that says we have a right to regulate that consciousness. And so we in my experience, we go through life in this society, in this language of conscience. What's wrong and what's right. But in the old Lakota way, it's only consciousness. Respect for all life, respect for everything, including yourself. And that covers all the appreciation that you can actually feel from all other life, the trees. And when you're in that appreciation, my uncle would say that it's the highest form of intelligence. And you feel that. When you're in appreciation, you're on top of the world. Isn't that a great intelligence? So this is another way of seeing these words. And yes, I'm taking this from a movie that I saw called The Arrival, and they said it straight up. They said the first weapon drawn in conflict is language. And I go back to some history of indigenous peoples, but I go back to Sanskrit. We didn't have the word for war, so I did some research and went back to Sanskrit. And war means to desire more cattle. That's what war means. And so that's what has been constructed throughout that Western history, European history, Occidental history that came here. And so to understand this as a Native person, yes, we need to live within a system, for me, that is abruptly not adapting itself to nature. It's just the opposite. I mean, excuse me, that's what it's, we need to adapt ourselves to nature. We haven't done that. We've taken everything from nature, and we think we're giving back, but standing outside on the shore, watching the ships come, as an indigenous person, it's not working. We don't have a term for climate change. No, it's because we don't need that type of dismissal, distraction. But when you're on an island and the water's coming up, I don't think that's climate change. That is other terms. If you look at it deeper, how did it start? Where did it come from? Why is it continuing? So in the comfort of Earth, this is what I base Earth's economy. This I feel good about, because Earth will always and has always taken care of us, of me and us, if we understand that all the beings, living beings, rocks, everything, have consciousness. If we give it that. Because that's what cares for us. It provides for us. But we don't have a reciprocity for that. We don't have the words for that. We tend to move it away, and not this consciousness here. I think that's a big difference. And being in another country last week, 2 weeks ago, speaking with, you don't mind if I say this, Nick? 2 weeks ago, with linguists, some quantum physicist, about 9, 10, 15 of us were in that room. And I presented to them this journey that I've been on since I was young, having to speak this language. And I think I've gotten okay with it and understand the deeper concepts of it, and came not to a conclusion, but to an ongoing surprise that the behavior we have as human beings, as humans, with Earth, is the fact that we still work out of domination. And so when I go back to being young, I talk about how grandfather and grandmother would describe all of this with simple words. So in that quantum physics language of Lakota, I could say mini. I was really wondering about mini waska. So I'm going to describe what to you is water, which we have no word for. We don't have a word for water. Now think about your mind, why? But think about this way, another way. M-N-I, I'm using this alphabet to describe these. Mini. E is voicing. Ni is living. In Mini is that which is in relationship between you and I and all things. So when I say mani, it's voicing the living relationship between you and I and all things. And for you, that's water. But if I say mani, instantly we understand all that, which I had to describe in English. And so you live with the quantum physics, with other consciousnesses that are also available and also very caring. And the thing that I have problems with in English is that it often takes me to a place where I have to thingify everything. Make it an object or a subject. And then ownership comes in. And how do we survive within that? I'm going to take it a little bit more, Nick, I'm sorry. But it's, if we, the study of time, if there is no word for time or concept in many indigenous peoples across the planet, no beginning and no ending, how do you feel? It just doesn't make sense. If there is no domination, no superior or inferior, how do you feel? If there is no cause or effect, how do you feel? Invariably, you've built a box. And we live in that box. And we go outside to extract, to bring in, we import into that box so we can survive in the box. And so this is my thoughts about how far I've come to understand distinctly how it feels to me, and what I have to think like a Westerner in order to feel like I'm speaking a survivor's language, like I just came off the ships. So maybe right now climate change is a survivor's term because it's over there. And maybe we're lucky here in New York, in Mohonk Mountain, but luck runs out, doesn't it? So somewhere along the line, the illusion is going to stop. And we'll be human beings once again. Yeah. So.
And when the music opened our thinking today, there was no time.
So this will be our last question before Q&A. Nick, if we could start with you. Terms sometimes are used regarding our connection with nature, such as reciprocity and mutual flourishing. I know that you're in the forefront of legal scholarship about how to address what we're discussing today. Can you please share some things that are happening these days and some thoughts and practical ways we can best be responsible to Earth and future generations, and also what might bring about a paradigm shift? So, and then Tiokasin also, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
You may have to ask that question again for me.
Yeah. So, can you please share some thoughts and practical ways we can best be responsible to Earth and future generations? So we're talking about perhaps action-oriented kinds of things, whether legal or otherwise.
Well, this concept that we are stewards and responsible for our relationship with ecological systems, the Earth, Pachamama, gives rise to lots of practical things you can do. And so too, the relationship that we have with the people who were here before the ships arrived. Now, the United Nations, after a debate that really began with the First Nations and the League of Nations, finally adopted in the United Nations the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Just as a show of hands, how many people have read the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12. Now, a practical thing, I think each one of us can do it. I will promise to do it myself when I go home tonight. I will pull it up on the computer and reread it again. Because it's good to remind yourself of what's in it. But it would be even better if you went back to your local government, and we have villages and towns and cities and counties, and represented by those of you here in the room, as well as the state of New York. If we ask these legislative bodies to adopt the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People as a policy, it's not going to cost them any money right now to do it. It would be to align their thinking with a question of how can we be responsible to those who were here before the ships came and work with the earth, work to restore the health, which is now in our Bill of Rights, the health of the environment, health of my environment as a person, but I'm not apart from the environment of the place I am in, which is Pachamama. So, if you are a member of a civic organization, why shouldn't your board of directors, your board of trustees adopt the UN Declaration? The United States government, has now said it supports it, other governments do. So it's not sufficient for us to be apart from the flow of progressive or different policy making. We have to help advance that flow and be part of it, or else we're part of the problem. It's not the problem of the indigenous people, it's the problem of us, who are the descendants of those who came on the boats, or came on different boats later. Another very practical thing, we have also, I think, a very intelligent understanding that, you don't mess up your nest. You clean up after yourself. You take care of yourself. You take care of the places around you. Our mothers always told us, clean up the milk if you spill it. You're responsible for that. We have allowed the state of New York to become complacent with the degradation of the environment in this state. We, for instance, allow pesticides and other commercial poisons to be used all around us, and the most we ever care about it is to have a little sign put up on the lawn saying, you better not walk your dog here or run around in bare feet, you might get poisoned. We don't even say what the pesticide is. You have to go and do research. This is very strange. It's not unlike, got me thinking about this when I read the Morning Times today, which was pointed out in 1926. They were applying pesticides to golf courses that were killing all the grass because they wanted to kill the pests and it was killing the grass. So what was their answer? Put dye into the pesticides so the grass would look green. Well, we're still doing that. It's nuts. And so I think there are practical things that we can use this new right to the environment in New York to do. The Bill of Rights says each of us has the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. And if we take the Lakota understanding of this, it's not just the water that's being polluted, it's the corruption of our relationship with living systems, with other forms of life of which we are connected. So it's time for us to say to our village leaders, our county leaders, our state leaders, the Bill of Rights means something. You have a right to, as an individual, to see that this healthy environment is now being honored. Time to change. It's not discretionary anymore. Up until recently, it was you've got to go and get a bill passed and do all this talk, blah, blah, blah. No, no, no. 2-1, the voters have said this is a right in the Bill of Rights. If you're locked up by the local constable and you want to get out of jail, and he or she has been arbitrary, you say, I've got a right to due process of law. That's in the Bill of Rights. Same thing now. The same sort of clarity has been decided by the people of the state of New York and by the General Assembly on behalf of the human rights movement globally. But if you're asleep, what will happen? Will anyone invoke that right on your behalf? It's our responsibility to care for the earth.
I like that. It's our responsibility. I think we're born inherently with responsibility that way. So the DRIP, DRIP, Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, I mean, that's how slow it is with all of that legislation and the gavel and all that. But I want to also say that in that Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples is this term, free, prior, and informed consent. And as I understand it, that was just not among humans. We had to freely go to nature and inform a tree and get its consent. Can we do this? We had to go to the water and inform and ask, is this how you are free? So solutions and goals of the West, again, need to come down and let nature do this. We cannot save the earth because earth is already doing this. And you saw within the last few years when you left earth alone, she came back. Did it not? Earth has provided the answers. But yet we are distancing ourselves with the language. With each other, we're told to distance ourselves. And just a few months ago, we were afraid of each other. So I'd say nothing is normal anymore, never was for me as a Native person. So I would want to say, but maybe I should, welcome to that place. So now we are all on that with Earth. And I'm glad that Nick had this peace with Mother Nature. But that's been ongoing. Speaking into intuitive values is what we look at, that free, prior, and informed consent of the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That's a must. You understand that. Because everything else came out of that document. Free, prior, and informed consent. Just take a little bit of your time. Don't practice it. Live it. Go and ask the tree. Ask the lawn that has a Roundup on it. Looks pretty for you, and like Nick said, has dye. I never knew that. That's incredible. So how many generations since 1920s has that been ongoing? And we have to question, again, these values that the West has brought here. And I know it's hard, because I can think out of the West, I can think from that the education I got, that I received in the West. And you say the wisdom, this wise old Native person, the wisdom of the Native people, but yet wisdom to us is only common sense. Maybe it's the common sense with Earth that's missing. And that's why we call it Indigenous peoples wise. So if it's good for Earth, it's good for you. If it's good for humans, maybe question that. I would say that, and wow, this is great with this Nick.
You know, one of the other successes of the UN this last year was the final agreement on a treaty for the high seas. And it's not about navigation and so on. It's about protection of biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, BBNJ. And the islanders in the Pacific, who are very much the indigenous people of their area of life, land and water and air, they've already begun doing this. They are setting aside vast areas of the Pacific Ocean as marine protected areas, bigger than anything we have in national parks. And there's a total movement to start saving the biodiversity of the oceans for the sake of the oceans, for the sake of the life in the oceans, not for people and not for commercial life. So there's an awareness growing that we have to do this. And when Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, says, nations right now are in a suicide pact. If you go and Google Making Peace with Nature, the report the UN did 2 years ago, it basically shows that what we are doing with chemical contamination, what we are doing with the depletion of biodiversity and destroying life systems, and what we are doing with the modifications to the Earth's climate are literally taking us into a suicide pact. Now, other species are going to survive, but humans, I don't know. And this is what the Secretary General of the UN says, so it's not just a few academics. But I think the other side of that coin, though, is that we hold the keys to our own prison in how we behave. So we have to change our behavior.
Don't you think also, Nick, that along with ecological diversity and biological diversity, there needs to be cultural diversity to uphold that?
Yeah, absolutely. We cannot lose the insights that historically have come with the very many First Nations around the world which are losing language or territory. When we allow territory to be lost in the Amazon, it's not just a question of biodiversity, it's a question of the cultural heritage and knowledge that the world can benefit from, but certainly the people who live there have a right, again recognized by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, they have a right to that cultural diversity and heritage. So if we believe in what has emerged around the world as many different people with their own cultural presence, then we have to encourage and stop the loss of that cultural diversity. It's happening still today.
Yeah, and I really think, because I just came back from Europe, that a lot of young people are aware of this consciousness, but they do not have the language to convey what they're feeling. They cannot express it. And so if we are able to express ourselves in indigenous languages, that this language I'm speaking to you cannot, like I said before, when I first tried to translate, interpret my language, it was almost impossible. So maybe it's looking at these words that really matter and going back to the etymology of culture also. To say, wait a minute, maybe we made a mistake, and if we are truly progressive, or whatever those words call, those are dangerous words for Native people, because it's expansionist thinking, and we're running out of earth. But I understand that the young people at other places, they realize that in this way, don't take this lightly. In Europe, they say we have ritual, but we don't have ceremony, because ritual is in one place. Ceremony moves. And so you find indigenous peoples, I could stop right now and go out and have a ceremony. Come back. We don't really, when I was growing up, my uncle would be working and then he'd stop and he'd go away for a day and he'd come back and he wouldn't have a job. Because to him, culture and communing and being with nature was very important, but it didn't fit the Western concept of work ethic. What he did was he went to see if Grandma had enough wood, enough water, and if someone picked her vegetables from the garden, and listened to her stories. Then he came back and he did the work, that way without ever getting paid. And he came back to be a laborer, and they fired him. So the values are very different. So when I say free, prior, and informed consent, that takes a little bit of your time to go ask. It may not make sense to you at that moment, instant gratification moment, but it will down the line. Yes.
Thank you, Tiokasin and Nick, very much. Charlotte's question and answer portion here. So we're going to have a question and answer.
Anybody who wants to ask a question, we'll come around to the mic. Anybody?
Anybody have a question?
Yes.
I have a comment.
Okay. Question or comment?
Both. I have regards to the Lakota language you were speaking earlier. There was one word that I knew. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it because a Lakota Indian chief had given me words to a song. Tatanka oyate wana upido.
Could you speak a little louder?
Tatanka oyate wana upido. That means the spirit of the buffalo people are coming. Lichozani, that's part of the song too. And then when you get the hipido, it means the spirit of the buffalo people are here. So when you said oyate, I said, oh, Calvin Campana, Sundance chief from Manitoba, Canada, gave us that song. And I was excited when I heard the word. Thank you so much.
Hi, I have a question to Tiokasin. Hi. Sorry. One thing that you mentioned is about the survival language. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I understood that you said that you feel the need to speak with a survival language. Why?
In my opinion, of course, opinion only, my experience is when those who came on the ships were running from someplace, were looking to discover something new because maybe the land was not providing as much. There were too many wars going on, so for centuries, people fighting wars in order to survive those wars and plagues happening. You develop a survivor's language out of trauma, and that trauma came here, and they applied it here, and that was basically new. And if you really allow us to study you, then we can say this about you, because it's been the other way around so much, because you've studied us as Native people. So now we're turning it around and saying, here's what we see. It's a survivor's language. We're going to hang on till the very end, and this is how we're going to do it. In that way. So.
And if you take the story of the Wampanoag were denied their recognition as a First Nation for almost the entire period of the United States. They're in a little place called Mashpee, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. They were the people who received the Pilgrims. They were the people for whom the myth of Thanksgiving would happen every year, and we would see these nice pictures of Indians and Pilgrims eating a turkey together. And yet they were being erased from the knowledge of the nation. Little Doe, a brilliant woman, went back to resuscitate the language. And now and they finally got recognition, if you will, from the Interior Department, and they're a tribe. So they have an elementary school, and the new generation of Wampanoag children are learning to speak Wampanoag as their first language. That's cultural preservation, that's heritage. Very important. And even today, we don't appreciate the hypocrisy of denying the Wampanoag the recognition that they had a language and a culture that was older than anything that the people on the boats, the Pilgrims, came with.
Other questions? Yes.
Is there a way that we can call upon the Bill of Rights to protect the Hudson from the release of radioactive water from Indian Point? Because I don't think we asked consent from the Hudson River.
Well, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was created by your representatives and mine in Congress. And it decides on whether the discharge of the spent fuel water that keeps the plant from melting down should be evaporated and removed or should be dumped into the river. When every nuclear plant was set up in this nation, Congress required a fund to be created that would have all the money needed to close down and remediate the site, since we knew it was a potentially importantly dangerous site. And Holtec was created as a company to shut down nuclear power plants, not make electricity. And since there was a pot of money there, millions and billions of dollars, the idea was that if they could shut down the plant more efficiently than somebody else, they could claim the unspent amount of money in this fund and have a great profit. And so by not evaporating, removing the wastewater that's radioactive, by dumping it into the river, they save a huge amount of money, and then they'll get greater profits from the money that the ratepayers of New York put into a fund in order to prevent that. Now, you've heard that story before, haven't you, in other contexts. So, of course there is a way. One can, in New York, invoke our state Bill of Rights and create a contest with it. And the one thing that has happened is the executive branch in New York and the legislators are all up in arms. Exactly the same thing is happening with the Pilgrim nuclear power plant on Cape Cod, ironically, since we just talked about Mohonk. But it's like every other classic environmental battle. If the citizens don't activate, the economic party in interest will persuade the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that it's okay, and the courts will support the government. Long-winded answer, I apologize.
Back here, answer.
Thanks. Well, I'm speaking as a Brit, and we're all speaking English, and the way Tiokasin talks about the language, it's a very powerful definition, I think, of what we're on about. But for me, one of the issues is the extent to which, before language was anything, women were bleeding and birthing and breastfeeding and keeping home for the survival of the species. Men were protecting and providing, and out there in the world exploring and what? Can you hear me? No? Sorry. But anyway, the whole issue of men being out there in the world exploring, and men who created language and laws and banking and exploration and religion, and the extent to which we've all been somewhat betrayed, I think, by what became a natural patriarchy, and men as betrayed as women by where we all are now in terms of the ecocide we're engaged in and destroying our own life source. So I used to be proud of being British and all of that, and now I'm really ashamed of it, and the impact that we have had and the ongoing impact. And it seems to me that if we were to more clearly understand where this came from, the roots of it, without blaming each other, but just understanding, our biology, and the context within which we're all conditioned and programmed, patriarchally, systemically. For me, that's a way to frame this, to see it in a new light. I don't know if anybody agrees or not.
So there's a great emergence happening, and I've experienced this emergence as for over 100 years the Lakota people weren't allowed to practice religion, her language, her cultural ways, her songs, ceremonies. 100 years. And only in 1978 when I was a very young person. I remember that sitting in a circle was illegal. Everybody else could do it who weren't Native people. Because that circle made everyone in it equal. But it was more or less about equilibrium and not equality. Equilibrium with the earth, with all that is. And the dividing of male and female came along later with the language, colonizing our language and codifying, standardizing, so we speak in terms of division and dividing. And the example is a tree. A tree is a male and it turns into a female. We have many examples to show us this, at least in my culture. So, yes, we've been affected by the program called colonization, but the reemergence of these etymology of languages all over the world is happening, and that is more awareness of earth and equilibrium rather than equality, because equality is given to you by a constitution, by the papal bulls, by everything that came on the ships. So we're continuing to define equilibrium in the small restrictive word of equality. And I think the re-emergence or the emergence of that consciousness breaking the surface now is, if you can understand it the way I do, we feel it the way I do, that's uploading from the earth. Not downloading anymore, it's uploading. And we feel it. And I hear the language, I see the language, but then there's a language that we say you cannot awaken someone who's pretending to be awake, because they're using all the convenient language of green this and green that. It's just another colonialism to us. And so the rights of indigenous peoples is part of that, but especially the responsibility of indigenous peoples is the emergence. And I think that's what the young people all over the world, indigenous or not, are starting to feel, because I see it and I hear it. So I would only answer that in a roundabout way. I'm pretty sure you have more of a specific answer, Nick.
Well, I like very much the tradition of the Haudenosaunee, in which the women decide who is going to be the male leader. And if the male leader is somehow falling short for the usual foibles that males have, women have the right to replace the tribal head. So other traditions look at this question differently than the Anglo-Saxon heritage.
One more question. Can we tell her we have time? Two more questions?
14.
Okay.
Thank you, first, Nick and Tiokasin. Thank you for your words, especially about culture. It's very impactful for me personally. I too bring my ancestors here with me. And, so that's just a comment first. But also recently there was the Vatican rescinded the doctrine of discovery. It's my understanding that that doctrine of discovery and those papal bulls were the basis for a lot of law and the rule of law here in this country, in particular property law. Do you see that the rescinding of this doctrine of discovery, do you see a pathway back to changing or adapting law here in this country that would actually undo or help indigenous people, Native people, First Nations in this country and all around the world to maybe get some land back? I'm told that there's untold amounts of land that the Catholic Church has acquired in its doctrine of discovery or domination. Is there a pathway back from that as as now the Pope has rescinded that. Thank you.
Well, we were discussing before that although the Vatican's message did come from the Pope, they claim that the doctrine of discovery was never official religious policy, it was just sort of foreign policy. But that declaration needs to go a lot further. It's not as fulsome as it should be, and but it does open the door to a decision-making process that can ask others to renounce the doctrine. It falls short of really renouncing and saying we're going to make amends for the doctrine. So the church has a bit further to go in its thinking. And then the Church of England, which hasn't done this yet, has to do it. The Episcopal Church in this country did it, but hasn't acted on it quite yet. So we have it's a valuable step in a journey that in which many steps remain to be taken. And that, I think, is the burden or the implication of your very good question. How can we make amends? First thing I think we have to do is to begin to repeal some of the laws that are based on this fiction that the European could come and claim the land because there was no one on it, the so-called doctrine of discovery. So how do we begin doing that? Well, a way to do it, which has already had the support of First Nations, is to adopt the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Then in that declaration, you'll see about in the declaration, people confuse it, it's self-determination. They think, oh, that means you're going to kick everyone out and take the land. But it really is the autonomy of the First Nation to decide what is that. And that includes their relationship to the land as something not a property right, but as we've been talking, a relationship, a spiritual relationship. And right now, those who rely on property don't understand the meaning of a people and the place where they live. And I think that we have to figure out how to do that, how to get that message understood.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between the word usage, because they didn't really rescind the papal bulls, the doctrine of discovery, they repudiated it, which is a very different definition. That's kind of like they just shoved it aside, and that's what I mean. You cannot awaken someone who's pretending to be awake language.
Okay.
But there's hope.
We have one more question, comment here.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for bringing up the example of the Haudenosaunee and the women choosing the leaders. Since you don't have a woman, I'm going to speak for a minute here. I have served as a Mohonk Mountain Indians Council for about 2.5 years during their opposition to the Pilgrim Pipeline and Solidarity Camp with Standing Up at their Split Rock Sweetwater Prayer Camp. And I want to thank Tiokasin for bringing up the concept of responsibility to the earth too. I came here as an immigrant. I was from Romania originally, so I too am a colonized person and brought here essentially as an orphan from my mother country. And in my journey, I asked myself, how can I bring peace and justice to this land when there's no place to run? My family ran to this bastion of freedom, supposedly. So I went around and asked every chief in every place I've ever lived, how can I help your people? How can I help the lands that have been taken away from me? Because I recognize these are your lands and I'm an immigrant and I want to do this right. I want to bring peace and justice as an individual. They each had different answers, of course, and some of them laughed at me. But it was appreciated. This was 20 years ago. So when it came time to work with the Mohonk Mountain Indians, that was my time to give back. And I worked for about 2.5 years, mostly pro bono, 300 hours pro bono. And that was my chance to give back to the debt that I owed the people of this land and this land. And we were able to stop the Pilgrim Pipeline, we were able to protect the Mohonk Mountain Indians and bring some peace and justice to them. And I did my job representing on a couple of cases and I'm very grateful for that. So I just want to challenge everyone here to take seriously their role as whether you're an immigrant or have ancestry that have participated in slavery or taking over these lands to do your part, because you all have a debt. to this land and to this people. You all have a responsibility. And we each, one of us, can do what it takes to restore justice. So, and if I could do it as an immigrant with very little connections here, so can you. So thank you, Tiokasin, and Nicholas.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're just gonna take a break and have some tea and cookies and coffee, and I don't know how much time do we have, and then we'll start our group discussions.